Parshas Vayakhel seems to us a rerun of Parshas Truma. Several weeks ago we read the Parsha of the command to build the Mishkan, and in this week's Parsha, Moshe transmits the command to the Jewish people, and they carry it out. And all the details are repeated. So it would seem that it's nothing more than a review. So let's point out one thing, that because of events that transpired between the original command and the carrying out of the command, the Mishkan takes on a whole new significance. The Ramban asks a question. This gathering that our Parsha begins with, according to Chazal, took place on the day after Yom Kippur, the day after the first Yom Kippur. So let's remember the chronology. Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai after the Jewish people were given the Ten Commandments on the 7th of Sivan. And he was there for 40 days, and he came down on Shemos or Tammuz, which is summertime. This is when he saw the Egel Hazov, and he broke the luchos that he brought down. And Moshe prayed and interceded on behalf of the Jewish people. And ultimately, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to go up and bring a new set of replacement luchos, and I will inscribe them with the words that were on the first set. And Moshe goes up, and he's again on the mountain for 40 days. He comes down on Yom Kippur with the second luchos, which is the symbol of God's forgiveness. So it really is 120 days from the time that Moshe went up the first time until he came down the last time. It's quite a long time. But it's 80 days from the time that the first luchos were broken. Make a calculation. It's 80 days from the time the first luchos were broken until that first Yom Kippur. On that next day, Moshe Rabbeinu transmits the command to the Jewish people to build the Mishkan. Now the question is, if the biblical chronology is in order, the command to build the Mishkan was given to Moshe in the first 40 days, before he came down on Shivas or Tammuz and broke the luchos. Only on the 81st day afterward does Moshe pass the instructions on. Why is that? Because if this was told to Moshe Rabbeinu during the first 40 days, then Moshe Rabbeinu should have passed the word on immediately, and not waited until after the second luchos were given and there was a symbol of the forgiveness of the Chet HaEgel. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu wait till the day after that first Yom Kippur to transmit these instructions? The Ramban answers that Moshe Rabbeinu understood that when the Jews are in a state of estrangement, a state of alienation from God, this is not the time to build the sanctuary. Because even God, though God did not explicitly tell Moshe Rabbeinu to withhold the instructions, Moshe Rabbeinu understood this on his own. But of course, this is not the time. In other words, the Jews and God need to be reconciled first. Then the Jewish people can begin building a Mishkan. So until the second luchos were given, until there was a tangible symbol of God's forgiveness, Moshe Rabbeinu understood on his own, there's nothing to talk about, nothing to discuss. There's no point in even mentioning the idea of Mishkan to the Bnei Yisrael. When he came down on Yom Kippur with the second luchos, which again, as we said, is the symbol of God's pardoning the Chet HaEgel, then Moshe Rabbeinu understood now it's the time to contemplate building a Mishkan, and Moshe Rabbeinu then transmits the instructions which he received months before. Mr. Ramon understands.
Well, it strikes me that had he given the instructions earlier, he would have had a place to put the luchos when he came down with the second set.
Well, for sure. I mean, forget the question where to put the luchos. I mean, they would have gotten a head start, right?
Yeah.
Because while he's on the mountain, they could have started gathering materials.
He knew that the purpose to go up the mountain was to get the second set.
But that's exactly the point. In other words, until he gets the second set, until he comes down with it,
he didn't want to raise expectations again.
The forgiveness has not been extended yet.
Right.
And therefore it's premature.
It's like a chutzpah almost.
I don't know, a chutzpah, but it's not the time. It's not the time. Everything has an appropriate time. When the forgiveness is granted, this is when you build your Mishkan. You don't build your Mishkan before that.
But isn't the statement that you're going up to receive this a statement that I've forgiven them?
Well,
maybe it's not as simple to the people, but certainly to Moshe it is.
Not 100%. Not 100%. You know, the very fact that the day that Moshe comes down with the Luchos becomes Yom Kippur for eternity implies that there's some level of forgiveness which only is achieved at the end of the 40 days. So it comes out that the Mishkan now is not just the Mishkan. The Mishkan now is the symbol of God's reacceptance of the Jewish people. And in fact, in next week's Parsha, it says, Eila Perkudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdus. It says these are the accountings of the Mishkan of testimony. So the Mishkan is called the Mishkan of testimony. What does it testify to? So Rashi says, Mishkan HaEdus, Edus liYisrael sheviter lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Masa HaEgel. This is a testimony that HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave the Chet HaEgel. Sharei hishra shchinasa b'neihem, because he was willing to allow his presence to rest among them. Rashi is bothered that this expression, Mishkan HaEdus, we find for the first time in Parshas Perkudei. We don't find this expression used in Parshas Truma. The Mishkan is never called Mishkan HaEdus, the Mishkan of the testimony. Says Rashi, that's something new. But back in Parshas Truma, where the instructions were given to Moshe before the Chet HaEgel, the Mishkan didn't have this aspect of being Mishkan HaEdus, the Mishkan of testimony. It's only now that the Mishkan is being built after the Chet HaEgel and after the forgiveness for the Chet HaEgel, the Mishkan takes on a new chashivas, a new significance, that it's the Mishkan HaEdus, it's the Mishkan of testimony that God has pardoned the Chet HaEgel because of his willingness, despite all that happened, to nevertheless allow the Mishkan to be built. So it's not the same Mishkan that was commanded in Parshas Truma. The Mishkan of Parshas Truma is not the Mishkan of Edus. It has nothing to do with the forgiveness for the Chet HaEgel, because those commands were given before the Chet HaEgel. Now, it's something new. It's a Mishkan HaEdus. There's a very interesting drasha that was written by Rabbi Yeshua Heller. Yeshua Heller was a disciple of Rabbi Sol Salanter, and he wrote a number of very interesting svarim. And one of his svarim was called Oyel Yoshua. And it's a number of very, very complex drashas that he gave. And one of them is a painstaking analysis of the differences between Parshas Truma and Parshas Vayakhel. But despite the fact they seem to be reruns, if you read the psukim carefully, you see there are minor differences in the way certain things are described in Parshas Truma and the way they're described in Parshas Vayakhel. And how do you account for those differences? And he explains that the Chet HaEgel is all the difference. Because Parshas Truma is the command that was given before the Chet HaEgel, and therefore the Mishkan had a certain nature. And the Parshas Vayakhel is the building of the Mishkan after the Chet HaEgel, after the pardoning of the Chet HaEgel, but that transforms the Mishkan. It's a different Mishkan. And therefore we would expect certain differences to be evident. I'll mention one very, very interesting difference that he discusses. In the command that God gave Moshe Rabbeinu, first he is commanded to build the vessels. The Aron, which contains the Luchas, the Menorah, the Shulchan, the various vessels are commanded first, and then the structure that is built to enclose them and contain them. In Parshas Vayakhel, we find the opposite. that when the Mishkan actually was built, first the enclosure is built, and then the vessels are built. Now the Gemara already points this out, that this was a consequence of a discussion that Moshe had with Bezalel. That when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Bezalel the first time, he told him, make Arayin, Kalim, Mishkan. Make the Arayin, make the vessels, and then make the Mishkan. In other words, when Moshe first transmitted the commands to Bezalel, he did it in the order of Parshas Truma. To which Bezalel said, wait a minute, that makes no sense. If I make the Kalim first, where am I going to put them? You don't buy furniture before you have a house to put them in. So therefore, it must be, said Bezalel, it has to be the opposite way. It has to be that you build the enclosure first, and then you manufacture the Kalim. So to that Moshe Rabbeinu said, Oi, says, you must have been B'tseil Kail. You must have been in the shadow of the Lord, because, in fact, when God told me, after the Chet Egel, to go and tell the Jewish people to build a Mishkan, God himself had reversed the order. In other words, the original order before the Chet Egel, Taka was Arayin, Kalim, and Mishkan. But after the Chet Egel, God himself reversed the order, and apparently you figured that out on your own. But it seems very odd. It seems that if you read the Gemara on the most superficial level, we're dealing with a practical consideration, right? Which is where are you going to put the Kalim if the enclosure hasn't yet been built? But Rabbi Eliezer says there's really a much deeper idea over here. It's not simply a question of storage. He says the following, that the Kalim, the vessels, are used for the actual divine service. There are mitzvahs we do. We light the menorah, we place the bread on the shulchan, etc. The enclosure conceals the avodah. The avodah is done privately. It's done b'tznius, in a modest way, in a hidden way, because it's surrounded by an enclosure. Now the question is this: when it comes to serving God, it's a very serious question. Should our avodah, should our service of God be private, or should it be public? Is there something to be said for doing mitzvahs, praying, etc., teaching Torah publicly, or is it best that we do these things in a modest, unassuming, hidden way? So Rabbi Yeshua says it really depends. You see, on the one hand, if we're talking about our being able to influence other people, there certainly is an advantage to doing things publicly. Because let's say, for example, I am very shaky in my own observance. And should I, shouldn't I? What are people going to say? What are people going to do? Certainly, I'm going to be reinforced and strengthened by the fact that other people are doing the mitzvahs as well. If I see my neighbors doing it, and the fellow down the block is doing it, then I'll also do it. It becomes easier. I'm not doing something individually. I'm doing something which a lot of people are participating in. But on the other hand, there's a question as to myself. Is it good for me to be public? And we know there's a very great danger that when we do our mitzvahs publicly, instead of serving God, we may be serving the crowd. We may be playing for the crowd. And this is something you have to be aware of. In other words, let's say you're the type of person that really can breeze through a davening in 15 minutes. But when you find yourself sitting in front of the congregation because you're the rabbi, then you know you better slow down, make it look like you're a pious individual, and so on and so forth. Okay, very, very nice. But it comes out in that sense, you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping the congregation. Right? For God, you would knock it off in 15 minutes. Right? But you have to hold up your image and prestige. So therefore, in front of the crowd, you got to do it differently. Well, that's a very, very terrible thing. Right? Therefore, if a person is not on the highest level of perfection, then perhaps it's better that his mitzvahs, his avodah, all be b'tznius, in a very modest, unassuming, private way. Simply, they should not be tempted to play to the crowd. You know, I find this myself. I'll share something personal with you. Maybe you'll want to leave it on the tape, cut it out of the tape. You know, the rabbi of a congregation is expected to sit in front of his congregation. If you're the head of the yeshiva, you're expected to sit in front on the mizrach wall and face your audience. Okay? It's part of the job description. That's where the rabbi has to sit. That's where the Rosh Yeshiva has to sit. But let's say you're visiting somewhere else, and they wish to honor you, give you an honorable place. So, as a rule, I make it a practice that, except in my own yeshiva, I do not sit up front anywhere. My own yeshiva is the exception. That's part of my job. But if I'm a guest somewhere, I just sit in a regular seat like everybody else.
What if somebody asks you to?
Even if they ask me.
You insist.
If they don't ask me, then it goes without saying I'm not going to move up front. They didn't ask me, you don't take the seat yourself. But even if they ask me, I'm happy here. Why? I don't want to be tempted to think during the entire davening, people are looking at me, they're watching me, how do I have to act? I'll do what I do for the Ribono Shel Olam. I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm tempted to play to the crowd, to live up to their expectations. Okay, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's something I just feel strongly about. And Yeshua says this. He says, if you're on a very lofty madrega, a very lofty level, where with a certainty you can say that I serve God and God alone, then you can do it publicly, and it'll be a very great inspiration for other people to do the same. But if you are not quite on that high level, then it's best to avoid putting yourself in a situation where you're tempted to play to the crowd rather than serve the Ribono Shel Olam. So he says like this, that before the Chet HaEgel, Klal Yisrael was on such a lofty level that it would have been right, it would have been appropriate for their avodah to be public. And therefore the kalim can be discussed even before they have an enclosure. Because they were on the madrega that their avodah could have been public. Because after the Chet HaEgel, it's true they were pardoned, but they nevertheless were somewhat diminished. They were not on the same spiritual level anymore. So on that spiritual level, it was necessary that their avodah be private by its very nature. And therefore, the enclosure has to be discussed before we discuss the kalim inside. And he goes on, and he goes through many, 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 many details of the discrepancies between Parshas Truma and Parshas Vayakhel, and explains the differences based on this assumption that Truma is the command given before the Chet HaEgel, Vayakhel is the fulfillment which is after the Chet HaEgel. But there's one thing that seems to me, I don't have a proof to this, maybe it's just a conjecture, that we see there's a tremendous enthusiasm in Parshas Vayakhel, a tremendous enthusiasm which is described, an enthusiasm to donate the material, to participate in the labor, and I suspect that this enthusiasm might partially have been a consequence of the fact that they were pardoned for the Chet HaEgel. As you know, you're in a situation where you become estranged, and the Jews were facing the danger of terrible punishments, and yet the Ribono Shel Olam forgives them and welcomes them back and gives them the gift of the luchas, and they are encouraged now to build the Mishkan. It seems to me that part of the enthusiasm, aside from the fact that in a general sense the opportunity to build a Mishkan is a very, very wonderful thing, but it would seem to me that the joy of forgiveness contributed to the enthusiasm that existed for building the Mishkan. And why I think of this is because there's a very famous Vertel, very famous Torah thought from the Vilna Gaon in his commentary to Shir HaShirim. We know we observe the holiday of Sukkot right after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei, and a few days later we observe Sukkot on the 15th of Tishrei. Now there's a famous question which the Torah asks as follows. Because we know Pesach commemorates a very specific historic event, the Exodus from Egypt, placed on the 15th of Nisan, and that's why Pesach is observed on the 15th of Nisan. Shavuos also commemorates a historic event, the giving of the Torah, which took place in Sivan, so Shavuos is in Sivan. Sukkot commemorates the fact that we were enveloped by the Ananei Kavod. But that wasn't a one-time thing. That was throughout the 40 years we were in the desert, we were enveloped by the Ananei Kavod. So really, Sukkot could have been any time. There's no date which is more appropriate for Sukkot. It's like the question when people discuss, should there be a date to commemorate the martyrs of the Holocaust? It's certainly a very appropriate thing, but there's no specific date that you can identify, because we're not talking about something which took place on a certain specific day of the calendar. We're talking about something which was spread over a number of years. In other words, any day was a day in which Jews were killed in the Holocaust. So Sukkot as well, if there's a day, a week to commemorate the fact that God protected us with the clouds of glory, it can be any time of the year. Why is it specifically in the month of Tishrei? So the Torah says a famous answer. The Torah says like this. The Torah says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu put Sukkot in a time where sitting in the Sukkah is not particularly comfortable. It's already getting cold, it's already the fall, and therefore it's recognizable that we're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. So that's why God put it that time of year. And I guess what he means is like this. He didn't want to put it much later, because then it will be in the rainy season, and then it would be very, very difficult, in Israel that is. And to make it earlier in the summer, then people would say, well, you're sitting outdoors because it's pleasant. So there's this narrow window of opportunity where it's not yet raining, but on the other hand, it isn't hot anymore. So this is the ideal time for Sukkot. That's the answer the Torah gives. The Vilna Gaon gives another answer. The Vilna Gaon has a cheshbon as follows. That yes, when the Jews left Mitzrayim, they were enveloped by the Ananei Kavod. But we can certainly offer the conjecture that when they committed the Chet HaEgel, they lost the Ananei Kavod. It's not reasonable to assume that during the period of estrangement, God still would have protected them with this cloud of glory. So the Vilna Gaon offers the conjecture that with the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, the Ananei Kavod disappeared. When did they return? When did they come back? So the Vilna Gaon says they came back when the people started the building of the Mishkan. And therefore he makes a calculation that Moshe Rabbeinu transmitted the command on the 11th of Nisan, Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur, and it took a few days, etc. And then on the 15th, that's when the Ananei Kavod were restored, and that's where the holiday of Sukkot is observed on the 15th of Tishrei. Very famous thought of the Vilna Gaon. But one thing we know, we feel intuitively in our observance of Sukkot, that the joy of Sukkot is not just because we commemorate the fact that we dwelled in the Ananei Kavod. In other words, to us, the joy of Sukkot is very, very much bound to the experience of Yom Kippur. I don't think that even needs a proof. I think that's something we all feel in our bones. That Yom Kippur, we are pardoned, we are forgiven, we are accepted, God welcomes us back, we are embraced by God. And that's why the holiday which follows is especially joyous. It's the time of our reconciliation, the time of our reunion, if you will. So I would conjecture that if the Vilna Gaon creates a parallel between the holiday of Sukkot and the restoration of the Yanani Kovet, we should assume the same thing. That if our Sukkot is particularly joyful because it is the follow-up from Yom Kippur, then the enthusiasm which they displayed in donating the material and participating in the construction certainly is a consequence of what happened on that Yom Kippur, which is the fact that God welcomed them back. They were pardoned, they were forgiven. There is a reconciliation. Welcome home, and therefore perhaps there's more enthusiasm for building this Mishkan Ha'edus than there would have been had the Chet HaEgel not been committed. Now again, I can't say I have a proof to that, but I certainly have that feeling that this tremendous excitement which takes place here, and it's amazing when you talk about the excitement. I'll give you just one inkling that the Meforshim point out, a very, very interesting thing. When Moshe Rabbeinu has this tremendous assembly, so it says at the end, Vayetzu kol hadas b'nei Yisrael m'lifnei Moshe. That all the entire congregation left from before Moshe. So what's the chidush? I mean, if the assembly took place, then Moshe gathered them and the people left. Of course they left m'lifnei Moshe. So one of the Mefarshim I saw says an amazing pshat. Like what was the protocol? In other words, the people are gathered to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to them. So what would the protocol have been? We would have said the following, that the people would gather first. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't be sitting there waiting for them to show up. Moshe would be in his private office. When the crowd is ready, Moshe would come in. After the assembly, who would the first to leave be? Moshe. Moshe would go back to his private office, and then everyone would leave. That's what we would expect. Moshe Rabbeinu, that should be the protocol. It says here that everyone left milifnei Moshe. Everyone left when Moshe was still sitting there. So I saw one of the Mefarshim, they were so excited, they ran to start gathering the material. The gold, the silver, the copper, the dyed wool. They couldn't even wait for Moshe to leave first. And one of the Mefarshim says that they suspected that if they wait for Moshe to leave first, they would lose an opportunity, because Moshe himself was very wealthy. And if Moshe would go, who knows how much he would donate, there would be much less opportunity to contribute. So therefore they had to leave, they ran away while Moshe is still sitting there, that they should be able to have the first opportunity. I mean, there's an enthusiasm. And of course, we know later in the Parsha, it tells us something which has not been repeated in the course of the entire Jewish history. There was a campaign to raise material for a thing, and there was too much. And Moshe had to tell them, stop, don't bring any more, it's enough, too much. I don't think that has happened since. I don't think there's ever been a cause for which there was too much money. They had to say, stop bringing money, there's more money than we can use. So again, this enthusiasm is because the Mishkan is now the Mishkan Ha'edus. It's the symbol of their forgiveness, and therefore there's a natural enthusiasm. Yeah.
The honor of Kavod disappear for 80 days?
That's the Vilna Gaon's conjecture.
80 days from
the Chet HaEgel until, well, it would be 85 days actually. Until
85 days.
Until the
so the Sukkot is the first day it's appeared.
Yeah, that's what the Vilna Gaon understands.
Is this the source of why we started building the Sukkah on Motzi Yom Kippur?
Well, I'll tell you, it seems to me that it's related to that. In other words, we know there is such a custom, right? That right after Yom Kippur, we immediately get to work and start building the sukkah, or some people will buy their esrog, but right away after Yom Kippur to start doing the mitzvahs. And to me, it seems that it is related to this fact that on the day after Yom Kippur there was this tremendous enthusiasm, and we tapped into that. Now, there's a famous story I'll just mention. there was a great guy in Galicia. It was Rabbi Yaakov Ornstein, the Yeshiva's Yaakov. And when he was a younger man, when he was a young person, he was married, newlywed. He lived with his father-in-law, his in-laws, in a little town. And one year, Yom Kippur, a stranger came to town. Right before davening Yom Kippur night, the stranger appears from nowhere, and no one knew who he was. And the stranger walks up to the chazan's spot and starts leading the services. Starts saying Kol Nidre. Imagine that, like a stranger comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden goes up to the Yom. So people were tempted to take him down, but he davened with such beauty, such grace, that they were transfigured. So they let him be. And he davened Kol Nidre, and then Ma'ariv, and then the Slichas that followed. And then afterward, he said Tehillim the entire night with such a melodious voice. And the next morning, he said brachas, and he psukei de Zimra, and he led the services in Shacharis. And when they took out the Sefer Torah, they gave him an Aliyah too, and they gave him the Haftarah actually, and he said the Haftarah, and then he davened Musaf. I mean, the whole. And in those days there was no break. He said all the tefillas, and he davened Mincha and Ne'ilah, and Meir afterward. It was just. But it was an experience that was unimaginable. Anyway, so after Meir from Motzei Yom Kippur, so the Yeshua Yankov's father-in-law invited this Yid to come for, to make Havdalah and to break his fast. Anyway, so they come home, and they give him a cup of wine, and he says Havdalah, and he seems to be on the verge of fainting, and he says, quick, he says, bring me something. So they bring him a plate of cake. He says, no, a Gemara Sukkah. Right? So they brought him a Gemara Sukkah, and basically on that cup of wine, he learned the entire night Masechah Sukkah. And the next morning, he completed the Masechah. And it was an amazing thing. And they found out later that this Yid was the Berditchever, the musical Berditchev. And he was traveling, and that's where he was in Yom Kippur. But that was the idea, that after Yom Kippur, you don't just act normal. In other words, you do something. So some people build a sukkah, some people learn Masechah Sukkah, There was a certain Rosh Yeshiva who held that a lot of people waste too much time looking for the perfect esrog. Hours and hours and hours and hours. Really not necessary, It's very rare to find an esrog which is really possible. Anyway, so he bought an esrog. In 5 minutes he found an esrog, and he spent the rest of the time learning. So he said that my esrog is perfectly clean. So it's perfectly clean from the chet of bittul Torah. Perfectly clean from the neglect of Torah. But in any case, it would seem this is the case. I'd like to share with you one very, very interesting thought, two interesting thoughts that the Ramban mentions in PARSHA's Vayakhel. There's a very big difference between the way Moshe Rabbeinu transmits the instructions to the Bnei Yisrael and the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the instructions to Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Truma. In other words, in Parshas Truma, when God tells Moshe Rabbeinu to make the collection of the gold, the silver, etc., he simply says, gather the materials, v'asu li migdash, and make for me a migdash. God doesn't list the parts of the migdash. He says, make me a migdash. And in Parshas Vayakhel, it's not that way. When Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people to take the collection, at great length, he says what the collection is for. It's for the Mishkan and the Krushim and the Urias and the curtains and the Caleb and the this and the that and this and that. And he lists all the various components of the Mishkan. And by the way, there's an amazing thing. This Rabbi Eliezer Heller in that drasha says something which is just out of this world. He says if you count all the components of the Mishkan, there are 100 Krushim, and there's 100 Adonim, and there's this many curtains, and this many clasps, and this many this, and this many. If you count all the things up, he says, and he gives you the tabulation, it comes out exactly to 613. There are 613 distinct components to the Mishkan. What do you say to that?
Bingo.
And by the way, there's no fudging. It's not like, we'll count this thing as two or combine these two into one. It's exact 613. It's an amazing, amazing thing. But
where does the 613 come from? Does it come from this?
No, Taryag Mitzvahs.
Yeah, I know. How did
the Gemara says
different ways
based on the pasuk of Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Moshe gave us Torah. Torah is 611, and two mitzvahs we heard from God directly, so 613 altogether. Now, so when God gave Moshe the instructions, he didn't tell him a list of all the components. And when Moshe tells this to the Bnei Israel, he gives them a very detailed list of components. So, the answer is very, very simple to account for the difference. Because when God gave Moshe the instructions, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'asuli migdash, make for me a migdash, k'chayil asher ani mara oschad," just as I am going to show you. Because Moshe was given a vision of the completed Mishkan. So Moshe saw what it was. Okay? But Moshe could not transmit that vision to the Bnei Israel. So Moshe had to verbally describe what the Mishkan was. And the question is, why is that so important? Whatever it is, just give for the Mishkan. So the Ramban says a very, very simple cheshbon. The people had some idea of how big the Mishkan was and what its parts would be, because otherwise they wouldn't know how much to donate. If you're going to come and say, we're building a shul, we need money. Well, what are you building? Are you building a shul to accommodate 10 people, to accommodate 100 people, to accommodate 1,000 people, to accommodate 10,000 people? Right? 1 floor, 5 floors? What are you building? So you have to give some idea of what we're talking about. This is a $5 million campaign, this is a $10 million campaign, this is a $100,000 campaign, what it is. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he speaks to the people, he can't transmit a vision, but he has to give them an inkling of what we're talking about. Therefore, that's why he lists all the various components in the Mishkan. This is the interpretation of the Ramban. But I saw another interpretation, which is very, very, very beautiful, which is this: that every person was going to play a role in the Mishkan, both in contributing material and as well in participating in the labor. So one might have thought that it wasn't important that any one person should have an idea of the entire scheme. Because Moshe Rabbeinu would coordinate all their efforts. Because every person would participate in his small way, and Moshe Rabbeinu and Bezalel, they would put it all together. So that's a mistake. Because when you have a person who participates in that way, he doesn't feel that he's doing something significant. He doesn't feel he's doing something important. So if the person who works on the assembly line, what's my job? My job is that when this part comes down the line, I turn the screw 90 degrees, and that's my job. And I do that 100 times a day, or 1,000 times a day, and what comes before and what follows after is of no interest to me. That's a recipe for insanity. Like, what chashivas, what significance, what importance can my work have if I don't see how it contributes in the vast scheme of things to the ultimate perfection? And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu felt that it's important at the outset that everybody, even though everybody is going to participate only in a small way, and again, Moshe will coordinate their efforts, but everyone has to understand the totality of what they're contributing to. Because it may be you're giving a piece of gold or a piece of copper or some dyed wool. And therefore your role is very, very limited. We have to understand that it is part of a glorious whole. And that's what gives you a sense of fulfillment, a sense of meaning, because you are a participant in something which is much greater than the role that you play. I think that's an important thing that all of us have to feel. Or sometimes we feel that we're insignificant in the vast scheme of things. Because we have to understand that we are perhaps playing a minor role, but an integral role to the entire scheme. And I'd like to give a mashal. You know, we live here in the 21st century. We were born X number of years ago. We'll live another number of years, hopefully. And that's it. In the vast scheme of things, how important are we? We're very important. We are the bridge that connects the past to the future, that connects Ma'amad Har Sinai to Yemos HaMashiach. Because it may be that, in a sense, what we're doing is trivial, but it's essential. Because we are perpetuating the Jewish nation to the next step. We are that link in the chain. Because if we fail, the entire enterprise collapses. So are we doing something which is glorious? Are we doing something which will be sung about for generations? Perhaps not. But if we wouldn't do our job, the failure would be evident. And if a person has a broader vision of the entire scheme, then you have a greater sense of chashivus, of importance for what it is that you are doing. That's one thing that emerges in this parsha. There's one last thing I'd like to mention. Very interesting thing, that it says that when the Jews came, it says there were two groups of Jews that came. It says, Vayavo'u kol ish asher nesa'o libo, all the people whose hearts were uplifted, v'chol asher nadva rucho oso, and all whose spirits were generous to give.
These are two
There are
different
two groups of people. There are people whose hearts are uplifted, and people whose spirits are generous to give. So who are these two groups? So the Ramban says there are two different groups. You have the people who participated through their donations. Those are the people who are nadva ruchavoso, the people who are generous to give. And there are people that that's what they do. They give money. They donate. Donating is a function of medivus. It's a function of generosity, a function of philanthropy. So those people who participate through giving, they are called nadva rucho. Those are the ones whose spirits motivate them to give. The people who do the actual work, that's a different category. Those are the people who are called nisa'o libo, the people whose hearts are uplifted. Why are the workers called people whose hearts are uplifted? So the Ramban says an amazing thing. You know, the Mishkan involved fine craftsmanship, fine metalwork, woodwork, embroidery, many, many crafts involved in building the Mishkan. Were the Jews trained in these crafts? What do they do in Mitzrayim? They worked on the farm, they built brick buildings, back-breaking manual labor. They probably did not have the dexterity in their fingers to do this type of fine work. And they probably were not trained in this type of fine work. Keep in mind that we're talking about Jews who had lived in Mitzrayim for generations already. You know, the enslavement was decades long. So probably these skills weren't found. And all of a sudden they received a divine command. They received a divine command to make a mishkan with this fine. Who was meant to do these jobs? You know, the Chassam Sofer says that when God appointed B'Tzalel, in last week's parsha, God says, Re'eh, see, Karasi B'Shem, I have designated B'Tzalel ben Uri ben Hur. So what's the Re'eh? See. What do you mean see? So Chassam Sofer says that this was an amazing thing. That there was a person within this nation who was so skilled that he could oversee all the various types of work. This was something that was exceptional. This was something that was really like see, notice this. This is something to see. Okay, but Tzal was certainly unusual because he was able to supervise every type of work. But Tzal didn't do it all himself. The work was under him.
He was a grandson of Kor.
Grandson of Kor.
So he was very young.
Very young. Right. But the people that worked under him, where were they trained? So the Ramban says that these were people who were nesa'oliv, their spirits, their hearts were uplifted. Meaning one day they woke up and they said, I can do that. And there was no rational basis for their confidence in being able to do that. They just woke up one day and said, I can do that. And he brings the pasuk which says, Vayigba libo b'darchei Hashem. It says about the king Yoshiyahu that he was confident that he could follow the ways of God. So it is with these people in the Midbar, that they had a certain confidence. What is the root of that confidence? And why were they so sure? They felt it in their bones, but why didn't their rational minds overpower that seemingly baseless confidence? You know, it's one thing to feel you can do something, but if you know you can't, right? It's like I wake up one morning and I feel I can do brain surgery today. Right? I'm not going to do it because I know I can't do it. So like, if they woke up with this feeling, I know I can do it, they should have said, no, that can't be. I'm fooling myself. Self-delusion. Can't do it, right? Why did they retain this illusion? The answer is very simple. God could not command us to build the Mishkan unless there were people who could carry out the command. Can't be, right? It can't be God would tell us to do something, right, that can't be done. There can't be an obligation to do the impossible. So therefore, there must be people within Klal Yisrael who could do these things. But apparently, there should be nobody who could do those things, because no one was experienced, no one was trained, no one had learned these crafts. So when a person woke up one morning and said, I think I can do that. So it wasn't a situation where his rational judgment should tell him he's fooling himself. Because if I feel that I can do that, I may be the one who can do that. Because there must be people that God has given a gift to be able to do these things, because otherwise the command to build the Mishkan will be a command which is impossible. Now the corollary of this is something that we all need to know, which is that God does not make demands of us that we cannot meet. That does not mean, by the way, that I will always live up to what I think God expects of me, because I don't really know what God expects of me. But I may be mistaken on that. What it means is this. What it means is that if I try my hardest and I fail, then I know that God didn't expect any more of me. I did what I can do. Again, assuming that I'm not guilty of a self-delusion. I did what I can do. Because God's expectations must be, by definition, commensurate with my abilities. If He expects it of me, I must be able to do it. If I can't do it, it must be He doesn't expect it of me. Now again, we have to avoid that trap of fooling oneself. Because if you tell yourself, I can't do it, but really you can do it, it'll be a tragedy. And therefore, you never should jump to the conclusion, I can't do it before the fact. It's always an assumption after the fact. In other words, I worked, I tried. I really did everything that's humanly possible, and nevertheless, I wasn't successful. Then I can comfort myself and say that if I really worked my hardest and nevertheless was unable, then it must be that God did not expect any more of me. But on the other hand, if it seems that this is what God wants of me, I have to assume that the likelihood is that he's given me the power to do it. That's what follows from this parsha. And these individuals, they woke up with that confidence. They said, I can do this. And they did it. And they built the Mishkan, which was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. And one last interesting thing about the Mishkan, Chazal tell us that the Mishkan had a quality which the Beis HaMikdash did not have. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, ultimately. It says the Mishkan was never destroyed. It was superseded. It was replaced by the Beis HaMikdash, but it never was destroyed. The parts of the Mishkan ultimately were stored in a geniza, in a hidden place, beneath the Beis HaMikdash. But the components themselves are everlasting. It says in the verse, Ate shitim omdim, shitim wood standing. The Chazal say that means she'omdim la'adu olam yom, lasts forever. And the Sfarnos...
Kalim for the Mishkan used in the Beis HaMikdash?
Well, the Aron was hidden away, but otherwise the Kalim were the Kalim.
They're the same Kalim.
Same Kalim. And the Sfarno explains that what was special about it was the fact that it was, he says several factors, but one of the factors was that it was a function of the generosity, of the willingness, the goodness of the hearts of the Jewish people. When Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, we know there was a forced tax. A tax of labor, a tax of material. There was compulsion. So therefore there was something deficient in the kavanah, in the intention of the participants, and therefore it was something that could be destroyed. Whereas the Mishkan, since it was a function of the love of the Jewish people for God, their willingness to give, to participate, and in a sense go beyond what would have been expected of them naturally. Therefore, the Mishkan was invested with a quality of permanence that was never matched. And I think that also teaches us an important lesson. In other words, we all want that our works should survive us. We want to leave a permanent mark. That which is truly lasting is that which we do with joy, with enthusiasm, with a spirit of giving. Right? That which we feel we're forced to do, we're compelled to do, we're stuck into doing, those are the things that don't last. Those are the things which have no real permanence. And therefore, if we're going to do something, we should do it with good hearts. Chazal say that a person should always do a mitzvah b'leiv sholem. A person should do a mitzvah with a whole heart. Because the people who did things, had they known that their actions were recorded in the Torah, they would have done them in a loftier way. It says that if Ruvain would have known that the Torah would write about him, that he saved Yosef from the brothers, instead of simply giving a suggestion that he be thrown into a pit as opposed to being killed right away, he would have hired a band, and he would have carried him on his shoulders, accompanied to music, back to the house of Yaakov Avinu. What's the idea? The idea is this, that something which is written in the Torah means that it's permanent. It's something which is significant till the end of time. Right? We think, unfortunately, that the things we do really have no lasting chashivos. Therefore, we do them half-heartedly. But it's the exact opposite. If we do them wholeheartedly, they would be everlasting. Right? If Reuven would have known that his actions had the potential to be everlasting, he would have done it with simcha, and that would have made it everlasting. And that's a musar. That's a point that we have to understand. That what we do in life, if we do it with enthusiasm, with joy, with happiness, with generosity, right, it'll have a permanence that will transcend us, and a permanence that is greater than that which is done half-heartedly. Okay, we'll hold here. See you, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week.